All right, everyone. So today I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I've realized that ever since the last few videos have been talking much more so about artifacts, I've been starting to get more and more questions about them. And I've been getting a couple of people asking me specifically about my account and how I manage so many artifacts. Because if you look at my storage, you'll see I'm almost at 700 artifacts. I actually have way more than that. The reason why I stay below 700 is so that I can quickly sell artifacts and not have them get sent to my mail when I'm doing things like the campaign. But I also have a bunch of, I guess you could say, dormant champions that I don't really use that often, who have a bunch of artifacts on them as well. Now, these are not my best artifacts, of course, because if I do decide to use them, I would have to pay the silver to unequip them and re-equip them on other champions. But case in point, I have a lot of artifacts on my account, and the more artifacts that you have, the more difficult it's going to become to manage them. But having a lot of artifacts really gives you the flexibility that when you decide to build up a champion, you know that there's going to be gear out there that's going to really fit that champion's needs, and you don't have to actually go and specifically farm for it. So I'd say it's a pretty important thing in Raid Shadow Legends to learn good artifact management, and I wanted to share with you guys the system that I use to not only manage the crazy amount of artifacts that I have, but very importantly, know that when I do decide to go do a mass sell-off and sell a bunch of artifacts, I'm selling the worst artifacts first, because it wouldn't really make sense to have all these artifacts and hold on to a ton of really, really bad ones and then just sell off the good ones. So it's important to know a good system to keep track of your artifacts so that when you do sell them, you don't make that really big mistake right there. So I'm going to share my system right here, and I will say this as a bit of a disclaimer. This is just the system that I use, a very basic version of it, and you guys do not have to follow it. You can make changes to it. You could adjust it based on your needs and your account, or I know there's going to be a lot of people like this who you're just quite simply not going to like it at all, and you decide to go with something else, and that is totally fine, but I just wanted to share with you guys what I use, so at least it's out there. Alright, so let's get right to it and open up with how I actually really value and rate my artifacts. And it's actually on a point system, and that's because points are going to be really easy to compare to how many points other artifacts have. It's just going to, at a glance, make it very, very easy to make decisions. Alright, so for artifacts, each substat that an artifact can potentially have is going to be worth 1 total point, and this includes bonus rolls as well. So when you actually look at common items, which are white items, they have a total possibility of 4 stat rolls. You've got your +4 roll, your +8 roll, your +12, and your +16. White artifacts do not have any bonus rolls, so white artifacts have up to a total of 4 points. Now, green artifacts are where you start to get bonus rolls, and you have those 4 rolls that you're always going to have, and then you have that 1 bonus roll, so you can get 5 total points. Blue items have 6, purple have 7, and orange have 8. And that kind of gives you as well a rough glance of how much power you can get from the substats of artifacts just based on their actual rarities. So there is a pretty significant difference from white items up to orange items, but you know, the difference between a epic item, which is purple, and a legendary item, which is orange, is only 1 point or so worth of substats. So it's not super insane. You don't have to go for god tier legendary artifacts to, you know, have good gear or anything of that nature. Now, we're also really primarily looking at substats as well, but there are 2 things that are also very important, which are the star level of the artifacts, but that's really easy to tell. Once you get to a certain point, you're going to stop using, 3-star artifacts. You're probably eventually going to stop using 4-star artifacts. And me right now, I pretty much only use 5-star artifacts on most of my champions, with a couple exceptions of gear that I really haven't found good replacements for. And I keep, some decent 4-star artifacts on dormant champions. But besides that, I really stick to 5- and 6-star artifacts. Also, the main stat. Now, this is important as well for things like your gloves, chests, and boots. But again, this is one of those things where it's just really easy to tell at a first glance, if it has a good main stat or a bad one. Crit damage, good. Crit chance, also good. And then you have things like flat defense, flat HP. Those are bad, and we already know that. So now the substats are when things get a bit complicated, because you have so many different substats. It could be very difficult to really compare one item with a bunch of substats to another item with a bunch of substats and see exactly how much more powerful one of them is relative to another, which is why I like to use this point-based system here. All right, so now what we actually do to assign points to items. So imagine that your item is plus 16 already. Now that doesn't mean that I'm going to be upgrading a bunch of stuff to plus 16, but I like to treat everything on the same level here to really make it easy to compare. And if an item really does have a lot of potential, then maybe I will decide to take it up to plus 16, but definitely not all items, and this is really just to get a fair comparison. So substats that you consider good are going to be worth the full 1 points. Substats that you consider not good are going to be worth 0 points, and this is really the important one here for the system that I use, is that third line. Unrolled and unknown substats and bonus rolls are going to be worth half a point. Now, if you're wondering the reasoning why, let's actually go and take a look at stats here. So we've got our stat menu. We have HP, attack, defense, speed, crit rate, crit damage, resistant, accuracy. But importantly, remember for HP, attack, and defense, you have the percentage version, but you also have the flat version. So you actually have 6 different rolls for those 3 stats right there. So we have 6, then we have speed, crit rate, crit damage, resistant, accuracy. So that's 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So we have 11 possible rolls here. And if we take a look at the 11 rolls, this is going to depend, of course, on the individual champions, but approximately half of them or so are good and half of them or so are bad. And again, this really depends on the actual champion. There's not an exact number. It's not like 5 are good, 6 are good. Sometimes it'll be 4 are good. Sometimes it'll be 7 are good. It really depends on what that champion's role is, but half is just kind of a rough estimate number that we can use here. So, if you have like an HP-based champion, obviously percentage HP is going to be good. Flat HP is not going to be good. You have your attacking or defense, which are really not going to be good because that's not what we're aiming for on that champion. You, of course, have speed, which is always going to be good on pretty much every champion. That's kind of the one thing that is really consistent. Crit rate and crit damage are good for most champions, but if it's a support-based champion, of course, and they're not primarily doing damage, then you don't want to count those as good stats for that champion. And then resist is, pretty much always going to be bad. Maybe a couple of exceptions out there. And accuracy, of course, is going to depend on that champion's skill kit, and if they have skills that really need accuracy. So again, case in point, roughly half of them are good, roughly half of them are bad, and 0.5 or 1 out of 2, 1/2 is just an easy number to use so that things don't get too crazy. So any unrolled stats and bonus rolls are going to be worth half a point. And this is a rough guideline. I know that there are plenty of adjustments that you can end up making, like speed, for example. Speed is considered such a good stat. Maybe you want to actually value it a little bit higher than other things, but I don't want to get too crazy, and I just want to tell you guys the basic system that I use, and you are always welcome to make little adjustments for yourself that you feel are necessary. All right, so as the artifact storage becomes more limited, you're going to work on selling off items that fall below a certain number of points. But let me actually talk about the unrolled points, because I know that's something that you might be wondering about. So unrolled items are worth half a point, right? Well, what you can actually do to make things a little bit simpler as well, and I will spend a lot of time doing this certain days of just going through and not necessarily leveling up artifacts to plus 16 all the way, but what I'll do is I'll level up artifacts to like, plus 8, sometimes even plus 12, just to see whether a certain roll rolled good or whether it rolled bad. Because what that lets me do is the unknown rolls are worth half a point. And if I actually roll it up to plus 8 or plus 12, what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to change that roll that is unknown from half a point to either a full point, which will guarantee that I'm going to keep that item, or lower it down to 0 points, which might make the decision a lot easier for me in order to sell. Now, I know that might seem a bit confusing and crazy, but when you have so many artifacts, it's really difficult to take a look at every single artifact and look at their individual stats and really get a good understanding of how they compare to all the other stats of all the other artifacts that you have, which is why you kind of want to narrow it down into something that's really easy to compare, like points, because then you can make these decisions a lot easier. Now, if you don't have a ton of artifacts, you don't have to use a crazy system like this, but this has really saved me a lot of time as I've started doing something like this, especially as I've gotten more and more artifacts. If I actually went through and I tried to take a look at stats all individually across all my artifacts, I guarantee that I would be selling artifacts that were really good and then accidentally keeping artifacts that were really bad. All right, so rolling items will allow you to change the half point value to either a 0 or a 1, and will change their point total, allowing you to make the decision to sell it or keep. So I just talked about that, and that's really, really important, because I'll get to a point, for example, where I will go through and I will try to sell off any artifacts that I find to be, 3.5 points or less or so. And there will be some artifacts where I've only rolled them up to, +4, and I want to find out more information about them. Like these boots, for example, let's just take these as a bit of an example, right? So we've got green boots, which means they can get a total of 5 points. And if we take a look, we've got 3 rolls so far. We can get 2 more. When we roll it up to +12, we'll unlock a roll, and when we roll it up to +16, we can unlock a roll here. So defense on these boots, I guess you could consider that good, but for the purposes of this video, we'll just say that that's considered a bad stat, just for an example here. And then crit rate, we're going to consider good, because on speed boots, crit rate is pretty much always going to be good, right? So we've got 1 good stat here, we've got 2 wasted rolls, and then we've got potential for 2 more rolls. So we've got 2 rolls that we don't know about yet, so those are half a point each. We've got 1 good roll, which is 1 point. So we have half a point, 1 point. We've got 2 points, but if I roll it to +12 and then +16, I can find out more information on whether it rolls good or bad, and I can actually raise it from 2 points up to 3 points. So if I'm going through and I'm selling everything that's 2.5 points or lower, now I can start rolling certain things and finding out more information about them to see if it rolls good or bad, and then selling off those items or not. So again, it sounds really confusing and unnecessary if you are newer to the game, or if you don't really have a lot of artifacts. But as you get to an insane amount of artifacts like I have, a system like this really does make it a lot easier, rather than looking at the stats each individually. All right, so let's see here. And the last thing that I want to mention in this video is this is just the very basic foundations of this system. There are plenty of adjustments that you can end up making, like speed is a big one. I think that's one that I personally use, and I value speed more than any other stat. So you could say instead of 1 point, maybe speed is worth 1.5 points, because that's how good it is. Or if there's certain other things that you're really looking for out of certain champions, this really is just kind of looking at it as basic as you can. But depending on your needs, what you're looking for, if you're looking for specific gear for specific champions, you can always make little adjustments as long as you keep it consistent across all the gear that you have. That's the only really big thing to take away from making adjustments like that. So anyway, I've thrown a lot of info at you guys in this video, and I understand, again, as I mentioned towards the start, that this system is really not going to be great for everyone, especially to those of you guys who are newer and you really don't struggle with artifact management issues. If you have not many artifacts and you can easily compare them to each other, you don't need to do something like this. But when you really get to the late game, and you've been playing for almost a full year like I have, and you are just getting so many artifacts bombarded at you, this kind of system saves me hours and hours a week, tens of hours a month of just unnecessarily having to go through and spend time figuring stuff out about artifacts. So that's going to be it for the video today. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. A little bit different than normal. Now you guys have a little bit of an inside glance at how I kind of work on my artifacts, and yeah, that'll be that. So have a great day, everyone. Take care. If you guys did enjoy this video and you want more videos like this in the future, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to help out, tossing a quick like means more than you can imagine as well. And more videos should be popping up on the screen right about now, so feel free to check them out. But if not, until next time, this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.